I'm Shaun Wegner, head baseball coach, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and you're listening to Badger State Ball.
Welcome to Badger State Ball, the official podcast of Prep Baseball Wisconsin. And today we've got a very special guest, the lone head coach, Division I head coach in Wisconsin, Shaun Wegner, over at UW-Milwaukee. Had a great interview with him and was able to talk about some that goes into his recruiting process, both in terms of style of player, what he looks for in a player, maybe beyond just the talent or what goes on, what you see on the field, and also talk about why he got into coaching and some of the most fulfilling parts of coaching. So we really enjoyed this interview with Shaun Wegner. If you enjoy the podcast, make sure to subscribe on YouTube or Apple or Spotify, wherever you watch or listen to our show at Badger State Ball, and we appreciate all the listeners and all the support that we get. So without further ado, here's our interview with Shaun Wegner. Today we're joined by our first ever coach on the Badger State Ball podcast, Shaun Wegner, head coach at UWM, the lone Division I school in the state. Shaun, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate what you guys do for our state and for the game of baseball overall.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you coming on, talking about recruiting and the transfer portal, talking about your program, some of the success that you guys have had at Milwaukee. I'm a now recent grad of UWM, not a baseball player, but I do have a little bit of pride in the university, so glad that we could have you on as our first guest. And we want to start out with some talk about recruiting and sort of how that's all wound up. But Andy, you mentioned that you wanted to talk about, had some questions about recruiting, so why don't you get us started?
Yeah, thanks for coming on, joining us, Shaun. I think this will be fun. Like, your background, your knowledge of the state, growing up in it too, I think you'll really be able to share some insight on what's changed, how drastically things have changed too within the recruiting landscape. But first things first, brief introduction if you don't already know, but Shaun, head coach at UWM. You've been with the program since 2017. You just took over as head coach last summer 2023. So just got done with your first year there. Spent some time at Mankato too. Were you? Yeah. Did you coach there at Mankato? You were a GA there, you said?
Yeah, I was a grad assistant,
Yeah.
so I was working on my master's, and I was an assistant coach as well.
Yep. Cool. So Minnesota, just next door neighbors there. But yeah, congrats again. Anything you want to touch on after your first year, taking over UWM?
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time, and this was kind of always one of my goals, having been from the state, being able to play at the Division I. That was the only one in the state since the Badgers canceled back in, I think it was 91. Mm-hmm. I was fortunate to get here as a player and work my way into a role that I was a player within the program that had some time. And then it was always kind of, how do I stay with baseball? How do I get into coaching? And then once I was fortunate and worked my way into a graduate assistant position, then the goal became, how do I get back to my alma mater? It's a place that I love. It's a place that I have passion for. In year one, obviously, there's goods, there's bads, there's learning curves, and as a staff, we sit down and we evaluate and we see what we can do differently, how we can go about our business maybe in a different manner if we want to get a different result. And I'm excited after this fall, kind of going into our spring. I like where our roster's at. I like our program, and I think we're taking some strides forward in multiple facets that many people might see here in the next couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. We were just talking about it in our pre-podcast meetings, of just taking a look at the roster, kind of prepping ourselves. I really feel like it's pretty strong. So like hearing you say that too, it's coming through to us on the outside looking in. But with that, on that recruiting topic, especially with how active you guys have been this fall, it feels like, can you talk a little bit about just how much has changed within this landscape and how specifically, within the last year or two, how much it's affected your own personal recruiting schedule, and by that I mean with underclassmen previously being able to commit, as early as 8th grade at times, sort of in a verbal way, to fast forward to now, that eligibility begins as, an August 1st junior. How much has that affected your awareness of these underclassmen and just your schedule as a whole? When are you first kind of beginning that process of getting to know the day one eligible juniors, not just in Wisconsin, but I guess more broadly?
Sure. I mean, it's There's been a lot of change recently, a ton of change, and we'll probably talk about many more here coming up in this podcast. But we thought it was an opportunity once they tried to curb the early recruiting a little bit. Kids were starting to commit before they even know what gym class or what they want for lunch, really.
Yeah.
Then they all of a sudden knew where they wanted to go to college. So I'm glad that the NCAA has taken some sort of steps to try and slow that process down, because I think you'll see the portal is here. We can't avoid it. It's a positive. It's a negative. Every coach in America will have an issue with it, but at the same time, we'll love it when we need it. So it's one of those types of things that if you don't adapt, you're going to die, and you have to just embrace where we're at with the game. We saw it as an opportunity because I feel like a lot of programs are really shifting focus towards junior college transfer portal, mostly because it's the quick impact, fill a gap. You're guaranteed to get college experience coming in right away, which gives them a better chance to play. But we've always been a very developmental program. I mean, you can see the board behind me. We've had a lot of people drafted out of here, and I think only one of them came in as a high school draft. So we've always kind of built our program from within. We try to find people that have a tool or two or three that we really feel can fit our program or our need, and then it's our job to develop them and make them the best player possible. So we've always kind of went the high school route. We have utilized junior college quite a bit over the years as well. Mike Davenport, tremendous baseball coach over at Madison College. That's been a program that's always had success, and a program that we've always tapped into as an in-state resource to kind of help fill our gaps and plug our boat when we're leaking, as we like to say. So we're going to use the portal. It's just the nature of the beast, because with changes, you lose some people, and then you got to gain people, and it's a matter of what does the team need at that moment. Can you go and take the high school player? That I'm not saying they can't play right away, because what we've tried to find is guys we think can get on the field, but a lot of those high school guys need that developmental year. I think we've seen a far more physical student athlete walking through the door nowadays. There's more strength and conditioning focus. There's more weight room access. Nutrition has become a huge popular topic with creatine and protein and focus on that. So back when Vinny and I played, we were a lot of undersized baseball players. Like we practiced a lot. We focused on the game, the instincts, the IQ. And I think with the boom of travel baseball, it's really helped with exposure. It's gotten kids more opportunities than we ever had. And that's a good thing. But at the same time, instead of Legion ball and practice and the summer practices where you're really focusing on the internal mental side of the game, I think we're getting guys that are falling behind a little bit more from that standpoint. So physically, they're more advanced. It's just the instinct, the IQ, the ability to adapt to the speed of the game and think on the fly quickly is where we're trying to really focus our attention in our program. And I think you've seen that in both the 25 class and what we've been able to do so far in the 26 class. We're just trying to find really good baseball players that we can have come impact us. Maybe they're high floor, lower ceiling, but we also think we can raise their ceiling a little bit and get them a little bit further than maybe they even think they can get to.
Yeah, that kind of leads into like my next question here too, because that seems like the brand of baseball player that you've been bringing on recently within these 25, 26 classes. They just feel like they're really versatile kids that can play multiple positions, like whether they do currently or not, like they're athletic enough to figure that out with you guys, like you said, your developmental approach. But do you have like a philosophy there in terms of the portal, you know, that junior college talent, and just how maybe it fits in with your approach toward the prep side of things? Like, you know, from that, the portal junior college player, is that someone who will at least give you kind of an insert plug and play right away type thing? And then the prep side, is that more or less always going to be a player that might need a little bit of time, like might not play right away? Or, I mean, do you kind of let those things just kind of play out the way they're meant to, or, you know, once they hit campus?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, the junior college / portal route for us is filling a gap, a quick hitter, someone who has college at-bats or college innings logged where they've been in a little bit more pressure-packed environment. And I'm not going to say that we're just trying to get developmental high schoolers either, because every kid that comes into my office and sits down and talks to me, do I have a chance to play, Coach? Well, absolutely, right? We have to do a job here and we balance the development piece and winning, right? No coach is trying to lose, so we have to give the best players the most opportunities. And I don't care if you're a senior or a transfer portal guy or an incoming freshman, right? We just need to develop and get the right kind of baseball players in the lineup more consistently that are going to give us a chance to win. And I'm thankful you guys have noticed kind of what we've tried to do is with this roster shooting back down to 34, we don't want to get hamstrung and logjam because we have first base only or catcher only. In my recruiting class here at Milwaukee, we had 3 catchers, and we were all able to move around the diamond with some athleticism, which allows you some ability to get opportunity to other players. It allows you some versatility for the player themselves because, you don't have to catch every game, get off those legs a little bit, go DH, go hit out in left field for a little bit, play first base, whatever it is. So we're trying to find athletes that can play the game and they have an instinct piece to them. The other piece that we really have tried to hammer down on and focus is leadership ability and just the way that they play the game. We want baseball rats. Like, we want people you got to pull out of the cage. We want people that you have to tell them, hey, you need to rest and recover. You can't just lift every single day. We want to get those type of people where they're internally driven, and we're just here to help in that cause. If we have to continually pick people up and encourage them to go to work, it's not going to happen for them. We're here at the time that they need it, but ultimately your internally team-led, player-driven teams are going to be your best teams, and that's what we've really tried to hammer in the recruiting cycles here.
Yeah. Sean, let me jump in here real quick on that. You're talking about some attributes that you really need to know these players intimately. I mean, you need to know these guys and some of the things and the attributes that you're looking at and targeting these guys. And I love your approach, right? Because eventually you guys are going to win with that approach, and you're going to create a culture there that everyone kind of understands. This is a program you want to go to if you want to become a winning baseball player. And so you're already trying to acquire those winning baseball players and then develop from there. So is it an advantage to be the only D1 in the state of Wisconsin? I mean, you're talking about, again, some things that you need to know very intimately about these players. And so you guys know these Wisconsin guys inside and out. They're right here in your backyard. Is that advantage that, you can almost see it as like an advantage. You're the only D1 in the state, despite, maybe you don't have the facilities of a big-time, Power 5 school.
No doubt. And we harp to our guys all the time, just like we as coaches, we need to be where our feet are at, right? So, we might not have a Power 4 school setup, but we still use a 5-ounce baseball just like they do. We still use the same type of bats. It's just about people that want to grind and work in that environment. Dalton Varsho is in the big leagues, and he was in the exact same cages. It says that every time we talk to a recruit, and they say, I didn't know it would look like this or whatever, and I said, well, that guy worked his butt off in there, and he's getting paid millions of dollars because of it. So it doesn't matter the surroundings or the environment. It's the people, the information, and your internal drive and work ethic that's going to matter. So I'm very blessed to have a staff that I do. I mean, I know that you guys know my staff, Corey Bigler, my pitching coach, who's been here over 25 years, Mike Porcaro, who I was able to bring back home, who was out at Arizona State in a couple different roles. Really tremendous, organized person, type A. Really good at relationships, communication, and he's been a huge piece of why we've been successful here in the early cycle, because he will hop on the phone and he will talk to anyone that we need to talk to. We have good relationships with the travel coaches. We're connected with the high school coaches, even just the community people. We have plenty of people within communities that we trust. And like you said, Vinny, it's about knowing deep down the internal traits of the student athlete that we're looking at. And it's so easy to sacrifice character for talent, because talent can win. But if you take the character issue over the less talented player because he's more talented and then he becomes a character issue, it's not worth it. So for us, we want to make sure we do a deep dive and get to know the player. When it's not going their way, what are we going to look like? What do we have to deal with? Because every single one of you guys played this game, and most of us fail most of the time. Even Vinny, who was in the big leagues, you experienced plenty of failure, I'm sure.
No,
so how quickly can you get over it? How quickly can you push it aside, move on? And that's the resilience factor. That's what we want to know from our coaches that we talk to. How driven are they by individual success, but do they rely on individual success as to see if they're having a good time and playing well? And we want the team player. There's no doubt about it. In college baseball, what makes college fun is you are a team and you are trying to win as 39 individuals for us this year, 34 next year. Each person plays a role, whether you're on the field or not. So we need guys that even when they're in the dugout, when they're in the weight room, when they're not playing as much as they want, how are they impacting our team in a positive light instead of pulling us apart?
You mentioned Dalton Varsho. Obviously, not everyone that you're going to recruit is going to be able to have a career like Varsho, both at UWM, but then also beyond. But what are a few of those traits that made Dalton unique? I know you came in a little bit like at the end of his tenure, but what are some of those traits that made him unique that you maybe think this guy could maybe have a career like that beyond just the talent?
Sure. I was a player before him, and then when I actually came back to coach, he had already been gone. That was kind of his last hurrah right before me. So I never formally worked with or played with Dalton. I'm thankful that he still has a relationship with our program. He's very, very gracious to us with his time. He'll do a lot of Q&As and Zoom calls for our guys just to kind of talk them through it. Just knowing him through those conversations, Coach Porcaro played with him. Scotty obviously had a really good relationship when he was here. He was internally motivated, and there's no doubt that him growing up in a big league locker room with his dad being a big leaguer, learning from the likes of Charlie Manuel and Jim Thome, he gets to pick his brain to hit. I mean, those are some pretty good brains to get some information from. So just being around it, that's why coaches' kids typically have an advantage. They soak it in. They're just part of the culture, and they don't really have a choice. But ultimately, that's a benefit for them. So for Dalton, being named after Darren Dalton, I mean, that tells you the impact that the locker room had on him, and he had the work ethic. You were not going to stop him. It didn't matter what people thought of him. He was almost like that pre-PBR, just the beginning of it. So it was just starting up, and he wasn't a very publicized kid by any means. He wasn't the guy going to all these showcases, but he doesn't want to be known. He's not a social butterfly, right? He's I want to go out and hunt. I want to fish. I want to do my work in private and quiet, and I don't want people to know what I'm doing. So that's what's made him a tremendous baseball player. And what's most impressive to me about Dalton is the guy caught his whole life. And we just saw him win the Gold Glove, which I honestly believe he got hosed out of last year. But that's a different story. But he went to center field on a team that was a pretty good baseball team with some outfielders, and he plays multiple positions, and he was able to win the Gold Glove and was even up for the Platinum Glove. So you take the instincts and IQ that he has, and you look at the way he runs the bases and how hard he plays, he's going to run through a wall for you. He's going to make the play when the pitcher needs it.
And it's almost an advantage, and Andy, I'll let you jump back in after this question. It's almost an advantage to be at a school like UWM because you hear like stories from like Michael Phelps who developed his talent and trained at like some podunk YMCA back in his hometown with an Olympic-sized pool. And that's not UWM by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, you guys are playing at Milkman Stadium. But, again, going back a little bit to it's not the Power 4 type of facilities. You don't have a $60 million, home ballpark with, the amenities. But it's good enough, and you're going to get that Dalton Varsho type of a grinder that is going to develop and is going to knock down walls to get to not only team goals but their own personal goals as well.
No doubt, and we want our players to emulate our city, right? We are in the city of Milwaukee. It's a very blue-collar city. You had a lot of industry that started here. We're called the Cream City because of all the brick. We want guys that are tough. We want guys that are hard-nosed. We want guys that aren't scared of the work. And ultimately, if you put in all the work at practice that we're asking you to, that's the bare minimum, right? At this level in Division I baseball, if you want to be a professional, it's when people aren't watching or can't be with you, when we can't have you due to an hours restriction, what are you doing without the glory or the praise? Because that's what makes the baseball player. It's not the 15 swings we ask you to have at practice were those quality. Well, whether they were or not, what are you doing at 8 p.m. when you have an opportunity to go in there and work on something you need to work on?
I love it.
Yeah. And you touched on this earlier, just in you doing your homework on these kids as baseball players, as workers, and as students first, of course. But when in the process does that kind of begin for you? Like nowadays, with the recruiting rules changing, if you could just walk us through that, and the players, listening, if they're not yet juniors, or maybe they, this is their junior year now, like as things have changed, like you just as this D1 recruiting coordinator, having done it for a long time now. Nowadays, like how does that look like within your schedule, like year to year, month to month, basically?
Yeah, I think there's some of those programs that are P4s and higher up programs that are maybe all the way into the sophomore class and starting to even look at the freshmen. We might not be able to contact them or any of those types of things, but they're making lists, right? We'll start looking at sophomores once we get to spring, so we know kind of what to go watch in the summertime. But really, it's about focusing on what your final needs are for your senior class, because the one thing we talked about when I took the job is we're never going to have our class finished before our year, because you just don't know what it's going to look like at the end of the year when you do have the portal open and you have some of these transitions. So we want to get really good fits and guys that we like early, and then we want to leave a little time and space so that we can really let the fall play out, see what our spring looks like. Did guys perform like we expected? Do we have to maybe find a stopgap in there to fill a spot? But we try to target early juniors, and on that August 1st date, make the contact with them, start the relationship. For us, we're huge relationship people, and we want to try to have a conversation with these kids 2, 3, 4 times before we even consider visits or anything about that nature, because we got to learn, right? And it takes time. It's the first impression is great, but after the initial excitement, right, when you talk to Milwaukee on August 1st, and then on August 3rd, Vanderbilt talks to you, right, one of those power programs, let's call them back on August 10th and see what their excitement level is like, because that'll tell a story quickly. And there's some people that, as long as you build a good relationship, listen, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, you don't know what it's going to look like. So if you start the relationship early, and you might not get them out of high school, you never know who's going to call you later on. Hey, coach, it hasn't worked out for me. I remember our talks, our conversation. We had a good connection. I think I'm ready to come home. Those types of conversations. So that happens all the time too. And the one thing I would encourage young coaches and guys in the recruiting sphere is don't be scared to hear no, right? If you want to be good at this job and you want to try and do something you're not supposed to, you better get used to hearing no, because it's just like baseball. If you swing 10 times and you have success 2, you're doing a good job in recruiting, right? Because otherwise you're limiting yourself. You have to take reaches. You have to go above who you think might be at your level, and you never know who maybe had a parent that attended your institution or has a connection that they actually kind of wanted to come to your school. But if you don't have that initial conversation, if you don't at least ask, you're never going to find out. So we try to do a really good job really early, right away, August 1st. We don't break the rules, August 1st. And have those conversations and just try to find out where the levels of interest are. And then from there we progress. And people, we watch them hard in the fall if they seem interested. If not, we kind of lay off of them and see if fall takes a toll on them, and maybe they start trickling back towards those conversations that we have.
For sure. And this kind of falls in line, I think, with what we're getting into here, because it feels like the most of all these recruiting rules changes that have occurred. I think for the most part, the advice that I've heard, like whatever, would pass on to the kids and players and parents listening would be just like, for the most part, like ignore it. Things change like so often that you may as well not factor that in until the time comes and see what the landscape is like at that moment in time. However, like the one caveat there, it seems like the roster size restrictions probably is something that really I would encourage like parents and players to at least be aware of, like the changes there, because that is something that should be a factor when like weighing options in schools. But I was just curious on your insight there and like how you think that's going to affect things. What you've heard the latest on. Like I think we kind of have the gist now of when those are going to go into effect, that type of thing. But just your thoughts there on like roster size restrictions and the trickle down effect that it'll have with these kids.
Sure. I mean, COVID was a scary and messy time for a lot of kids, and it really ballooned rosters. And we had to, because we had to give opportunity, but now we're starting to draw it kind of back in a little bit. And there are some people that aren't happy with the number at 34. They wanted a little bit more, maybe a 37, 38. For me, I'm fine with it. I think you want to have the back end of your roster to develop, but at the same time, like if you keep going with more roster numbers, sometimes those guys get lost, and it's not fair to those players either. So we were at 35 forever. It's one less than we used to be at, and I think sometimes people forget that. It's not that drastic from what we had pre-COVID. But you are going to see, especially in this first year, there are going to have to be players that go, right? Because if you're at a 40-man roster this year, the limit, and next year you didn't graduate and you have a signed class, like people have to get down to the 34 number. And like you said, it's not set in stone yet. It seems like that December 1st date is kind of the idea that's been floated and become the most popular, where you might have to get that roster down to 34. Again, you're going to get coaches on both sides of that argument who like it, who don't like it. I think from our standpoint, it's tough because we're not a program that initially over-recruits in the fall anyways. We typically bring in our roster, and we don't have anything more than that. But if you have 50 guys in the fall and then 16 got to find a spot, it's a tough thing for students. It's a tough thing for families, because you see how excited these kids get when they commit and they create their posts and they sign. It's really hard to watch them when they have to be told, well, it's time to find a new home, because they had given their life's work up to that point to get to where they wanted to go. And sometimes to no fault of their own, they went into a roster that was senior laden and they were really veteran and they just don't have room. But they need that, because if there's an injury or something happens and they need to maybe gray shirt or medically red shirt a kid, then they can do that. So my administration has asked me just to have our number right away, and it's something that I'm okay with. I'm going to oblige, because I think it's fair to the kids. It's fair to the families. And that's the one thing, like you said, kids have to do their research, because I remember when I was coming up, recruiting in our state wasn't nearly what it is today. I think we had 3 to 5 Division I players in my class, and now you're seeing 25, 30 players, right? Mm-hmm. Again, really good for Wisconsin baseball, great opportunities for those kids. And a lot of that has to go to your organization, what you guys do. So thank you for that. However, I think kids can get lost in the shuffle of the sweatshirts, the facilities, all those types of things without properly researching and making their choice for the right reasons. So I think knowing what's coming back on those teams, knowing what's gone, what positions were available, but then also looking at the recruiting classes. If the classes say they have 25 guys for a 34-man roster, you might not want to commit after those 25, because it's going to be really hard to make that roster. So.
Yeah. Well, and if you do, like, know what you're getting into, I think as well, like, yeah, compete, like, for that roster spot for sure. Like, it's totally within your right to. But that's exactly where, Shaun, I think you made the point, and it's the best advice anyone could give. And, you hear it a lot, but just maintaining those relationships is, like, as critical as it's ever been. It's like the best thing you can do, because, if you compete and make the team, like, with that roster spot, more power to you. But, if you do end up needing to find a new home, like, you don't have burned bridges now. Like, you have a lot of options. You've only kept doors open for yourself. So, yeah, I think just wanted to reemphasize that point too, because it's just really sound advice.
What about players, Shaun, that use? How do you think about the whole situation where a player could potentially be using UWM as a springboard, or a player has a great year and then uses it to enter the transfer portal? How do you think about that as a head coach?
Yeah, I mean, I said it earlier when we started, but we don't get to dictate how this game is going right now, right? I think the NCAA, and rightfully so, made some changes, but maybe they pushed the chips too quickly to the other side of the table. And we tell every kid that sits in here, like, we understand it. If we don't acknowledge it, if we don't adapt to it, we're not going to have a chance, right? And we don't just want to continually get guys and get them out of here and push them to the quote-unquote higher levels. That's not my goal, right? But I can't be naive enough to know that can't happen, because I think back to when I was a player, right? If I had that opportunity and someone said, well, hopefully they're not saying pre-portal, but if someone told me I have a chance to make some real money that can impact my life or my family's life, like I would consider it, right?
Yeah.
It's no different than a coach who gets a job offer, and they'd be pretty dumb not to at least listen, right? So I have to acknowledge it. I have to adapt to it. But I also tell those kids, listen, you give us 2 good years, and ideally what I want is through their first draft year. Give me through your first draft year, because a lot of you want to play pro baseball. Let us try to help you get there. If by that year we haven't been able to accomplish what you want, and you think you have a chance to springboard yourself up and go to an opportunity to maybe elevate your profile, I'll help you, right? But at that same time, my job as a coach is to try and do things within this organization to get you to want to stay here and be a part of what we're doing, because ultimately I'm a huge guy with loyalty. I'm a huge guy with family. But it's on me to make sure that that's how they feel. So I have to do a good job of building our program and continually enhancing and growing, never knowing that I'm going to get to a SEC level, but how can I make this place the best it can be so that kids want to come here and then they want to stay here and help us develop into where we need it to go.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it could be like a slippery slope, but I'm curious, like, too, if that becomes almost like a recruiting tool in itself, that you're able to, successfully develop some of these guys into full-on, SEC level type draft type players, that just in this portal kind of era, after 2, ideally 3 years, like can move on and maybe make some of that NIL money, whatever it is. Like, does that kind of does that sit right with you in a way, or like is that just sort of the new age sort of approach? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we've had people ask, like, would you consider being a 4-year junior college, essentially, right? Like, you're the development piece to get them to that next level. And I don't know that there's many coaches that are going to say, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to get my players really good and then give them to someone else.
Yeah, for sure.
We're all trying to get our program to be the best that it can be. But again, it's about having self-awareness. If we want our players to have self-awareness of themselves when we're training and when they're playing, we got to do the same as coaches, right? We just got to be really good where we're at, and we got to understand where we're at, right? I know, like Vinny has mentioned, like, we don't have the SEC facilities. We have a really nice playing field. We love playing down at Milkman Field, and we encourage anyone that's looking to watch the Panthers to come on out. But there are some limitations, and I think every mid-major has limitations. And you know what? There's parity within the SEC and within the Big Ten and within these programs too. So it's really just an excuse if you allow it to be. And that's the one thing I was taught early in life is don't make an excuse, find an answer, right? So I just got to continue doing my job and trying to get us to where kids don't want to say no because they want to be part of what we're doing. And I think that's really what leadership is. It's not pulling people to where you need them to be. It's wanting them so bad to be there that they have to do it.
Yeah, and the grass is not always greener. I'll give my 2 cents to any player potentially listening and considering going there, or any mid-major really, is the grass is not always greener, so be part of something that you're going to win and just really enjoy playing baseball and develop. And then if you are good enough, you will make a heck of a lot more money at the big league level if you get to arbitration. Very few and far between do that, but the money that you could potentially make NIL, don't go. I would tell a player, don't really chase that, because develop to be the best you can be, and if you're that good, you can make life-changing money at the major league level.
Yeah, and it's a little scary too. I just want kids to understand and realize, like, when you go to a different surrounding or you're in a different area, if you were comfortable here in Milwaukee because it's close to home, you had family near, whatever the situation was, and then you shoot 2,000 miles away, and it's weird, it's awkward, it's people that are different than you because we have the weird Midwest accent, but they're Southerners or whatever it is, right? Like, comfortability matters, right? You have to feel comfortable, because when you're comfortable, that's when you play the easiest and the most free, right? So it sounds great all the time. And that happens for some players too, moving up to us, quite honestly. Like, we've had players come Division III, Division II, junior college, where they were the king of the crop down there, right? Like, they were the best players. And then they get here, and do they show up with that same confidence, or is it kind of a scary, big new situation because it's Division I baseball? And I think all of you can can vouch to this. Baseball is baseball, right? There's
Right.
Division I baseball players at all levels. I was fortunate to coach at the D2 and the D3. Coach Vo has a really good program down there. I was fortunate to be a part of it, and we were able to win a national championship, and that's because we had really talented players that played the right way. Same thing at Mankato. We came up a little bit short, but we were in the World Series because we had a couple Division I players. It's just a matter of the depth or the length throughout the roster that you're going to see it, right? So some Division I players need to go down because they need to become comfortable. It's too high of a level. They can't just relax enough to play, right? So I caution players to really evaluate the whole situation. And like you said, don't just chase the money because money's fleeting. And that money's not always guaranteed. That's the scary part of it.
Yeah, so with the changes in the recruiting calendar and just the overall changes in just the landscape of recruiting, like how does like events like the state games, like do you have to circle that event like, hey, I have to be there? Like we look at the roster this past year and you've got three guys from that roster already. Like, is this an event that you're going to be making sure that you're at in the years to come?
Yeah, I think we're very targeted with our approach. Obviously, we're not going to have some of the recruiting budgets that some of these programs have. And what money we do have, we want to make sure that we spend it wisely, and we're very targeted, right? So when it's in our backyard, we got to be there. We have to have multiple people there. We got to hammer it because that's an opportunity not only to see those kids, but they're in our surrounding a lot of times, right? A lot of those are at Franklin Field, right? So it's almost a free recruiting opportunity to see where we play, right? So we get kids that play in there. A lot of times our first question is, well, have you ever played at our field or have you ever been around it? And a lot of times it comes back to I attended a PBR event at the Rock and I saw it, or we played on the field and I really liked it, Coach. It was an awesome field. So there's no doubt that when we get together as a staff, we're always looking at certain tournaments we typically attend. We try to get to the future games, which is a big event for you guys. But we want to make sure that we're present and that we're putting our brand out there when you guys are in the area or in the state, because if we're going to become a really good program, we think we have to start by building from within, and we're never going to be able to create a border around our state. It's going to be impossible because we only have 34 spots too. There's more than 34 high schoolers coming out of the state. All those things matter, right? So if we can get guys to stay home, that will impact our program, and that's how I think we can win the best, is by having homegrown local kids play for us, because I grew up with that civic pride that I wanted to represent my city and play well with my teammates, and we are the only Division I in the state. So we want guys that are proud to be Wisconsinites, that want to stay home, they want to do something special maybe that hasn't been done here before, and represent that we have really good baseball here, because you see draft picks come out of here all the time, whether it's out of high school or after going and play somewhere. We are a little slower in our development because we're a northern state, but that doesn't mean that we can't be as good as some of those southern players. It just takes a little bit more time typically.
Yeah, on that topic too, like I think a lot gets talked about just the disadvantages of being a cold weather player, specifically like Wisconsin. I think like on the draft side, even like it takes a lot of convincing, I think, from like an area scout to convince their higher ups, their cross checkers, scouting directors, like, hey, no, this Wisconsin kid's the real deal. Like, here's why. But you know the Wisconsin baseball scene as well as anybody. I'm just curious if you, off the top of your head, like, what are some of the advantages? I think, like, if you're a kid listening to this, playing high school baseball at a high level, it's not all like downhill. Like, you got a lot of pros on your side too.
Yeah, I think it's a catch-22 argument, right? Like, there's no doubt that you are quote unquote disadvantaged, because even when you're indoors, you're limited in some of the things that you can do. And a lot of these players in the South and on the West Coast are playing year-round outside. So it's easy to get a better read on the fly ball when you're outside versus a machine in a cage, right? You're not going to do it. So I think what kids have to understand and realize is, just like we do in our sport on our side, it's about where is your ceiling? What development is left? Because that's another piece of the pie that I don't think they talk about as much, is those kids develop faster, but maybe they are closer to their potential already. Whereas us northern kids, you still got a lot of untapped potential you don't know about. And that's what scouts are looking at. And a lot of times that's why they end up going to college, because they still have to develop that little bit more to get to the pro level. And that's why you don't see a ton of, especially hitters for the most part in the North, going, because you don't get to see them year-round in their competitions against pitching. So I think if you're a Northern kid, you really have to do well in your summer opportunities. If you're going to some of the bigger events like area codes and some of those types of things, that's when you have to do your performing. Because when it comes to March and April in Wisconsin and they're watching you face some high school pitching, I don't think they're going to quite value that performance or that success nearly as much as if you do it against some of those higher rated prospects in some of those bigger events.
Yeah.
Does that make like recruiting junior college more, especially up in these states, like just more like? Do you need to know the rosters a little more, like because these guys could pop at any year?
No
really.
doubt. It's a lot of late bloomers that end up at JUCO, like Owen Rice was one of those kind of guys. I mean, he graduated high school probably, I don't know, I think he told me 5'11" or 6 foot, and by the time he finished with us, he was 6'5", 240. You know, like that's quite a jump. And the fastball goes from 82 with a gangly, awkward-looking young baby deer to 95 with lift and one of the top-ranked fastballs in the Division I ranks. You know, so JUCO is a good route for a lot of people, right? Everyone develops at different levels, and it takes time sometimes. We miss on a lot of players. People ask me all the time, like, hey, did you talk to this kid? And there's certain guys where I'll look back, I'm like, what was I missing? I mean, the Brewers just picked up Caleb Durbin. I went and did research on PBR the second I saw him pick, because I was like, Lake Forest, Illinois kid, how did I not know about him? He went to Wash U for Pat Bloom, former UWSP coach. Something about him must have been flying under the radar. He just set an Arizona Fall League for stolen bases. Did he not run? Well, he ran a 7.3 when you look back then. So between then and now, things have changed. And some people are just later in their development process. So if you want to play collegiate baseball, there's a place for you. It just might not be exactly where you think you need to be at right now, right? Some people need to take a couple years extra development to get to maybe the program they want to go to. But don't let where you're at deter you, because good baseball is everywhere. Every level, every state, every country, really. There's baseball popping up all over the world. So don't make excuses. Just keep working at it. And if you're really passionate about it, you'll find a way to keep playing.
You mentioned Owen Rice, also AJ Bluebaugh, Riley Frey. There are guys who are playing pro ball right now who were drafted. What goes into that pitching development? Because it's been, I would say, kind of a recent trend. There are a few other pitchers who are in pro ball right now from your program. What goes into that, especially in an off season where you can maybe add that velocity or work on some of those things to refine their abilities for the spring?
No doubt. Corey Bigler, our pitching coach, shout out to him. He does a tremendous job with our players. And the one thing that we talk about a lot as a staff is we got to meet our players where they're at. We're not going to cookie cutter approach this thing. Everyone moves differently. We do movement screenings, trying to figure out what are their strengths, their weaknesses, where's their quote-unquote disabilities that we can work on, strengthening. And we try to approach it that way because professional baseball, let's be honest, is an individual-focused thing. You're trying to get to the big leagues. So, yes, you're trying to win baseball games in the minors, but ultimately your goal is to get to the big leagues. So whatever it takes for you to get there, you're going to do it. Same thing here. Guys want to be pros. We don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can focus on you and selfishly take care of your work and get you to how good you need to be while still impacting your team in the proper way. So Corey does a really good job individualizing plans, making sure guys are attacking weaknesses, but always kind of enhancing their strengths. And a lot of those guys that you just mentioned, a lot of velo comes because they just get in the weight room, right? They start dominating and really falling in love with their diet, their nutrition. One thing Coach Duffick, who was my mentor, taught me so much about this game, always said is you can never outwork your diet, right? No matter how hard you work in the weight room, if you're not actually focusing on what goes in, it doesn't matter. And that's not to say you have to look like a Greek god either, right? Because I think Vinny can probably attest to this. You go in the locker room in some big league clubhouses, there's some guys that don't look great when the shirt's off.
Yeah, right.
But they got strength still, right? They still have the strength in the areas in the baseball-centric focus that they need. So Bluebaugh was a perfect example. He was like Gumby coming in here, right? Just arms all the way scratching his ankles. you could really see the ceiling in there. And a lot of people will tell you, like, oh, he's going to throw hard someday. But why? Explain to me why you think he's going to throw hard. Because it's such a easy thing to say. He has no weight on him, so he's going to throw hard, right? But he worked his tail off. And by the time he left here, man, it was fun to watch him because he had the mentality. He's a super athlete. That's what most people don't know about him. The guy can windmill dunk. He can do all sorts of things. And that's where we try to focus some of our recruiting on that multi-sport athlete still, because athleticism plays, right? And if you're a multi-sport athlete, the one thing that tells us is you compete, you're athletic, but more than anything, that's maybe where some of that untapped potential lies, because you've never truly just focused on the sport of baseball. So once we take away some football or soccer or basketball, and you get in the weight room, you maintain some more weight because you're not always burning all these calories, maybe that's what it takes to take off. So that's where Corey does a really good job with those individualized plans. And honestly, we've seen a lot of guys not get to where they want to get to, right? Like it's again, everyone's process is different. Some people in the first year take that jump, and some people it takes till year 4 or year 5, and maybe they're old at that point, so they can't get to professional baseball. But we're just trying to help them realize their dreams, realize their goals, and max out and tap out their potential while we're with them.
I love that. And it's athleticism, and then just that undying fire inside, that passion for the game and just the love for the game. That's what it sounds like you guys are targeting, and you guys are going to get to a point where people are going to really take note of UWM baseball. Really excited for you guys. Probably a couple more questions here before we wrap up. Really appreciate your time, Shaun.